So what brands do you think about when you say British heritage brands? Is it Cadbury's, Post Office, Rolls-Royce? To hundreds of thousands, they say the National Trust. And in a poll last year that I just researched, it was by far the most well-known British charity. And I guess founded back in 1895. It's had a few hundred years or few years under its belt connecting heritage with the future. And today we've got Mark, the Communications and Campaigns Director at the brilliant organisation that is the National Trust. And yeah, wow. I mean, look at this. He's been the person charged with helping a 130-year-old organisation stay relevant, especially within the face of the climate crisis, which is definitely no small task, especially when you're speaking to over 5.3 million members. That's a stat and a half, isn't it? So we first met a few months ago when you just around the launch of a bold 10-year strategy and the release of that. And that was shaped by asking over 70,000 people a simple and beautiful but powerful question: how can we serve you? Which I love. And this kind of thinking is helping the organisation evolve from a traditional heritage body into a powerful voice for climate and nature. So really delighted to welcome you to Shifting Narrative today. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Joss.
So, and you've got a long history working in some really interesting organizations. You clearly agree that storytelling is the solution, having carved out a whole career in driving communications in nature and conservation. But I'm interested to know where all of this began. Where did your connection to nature and communication start?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me on the podcast for a start. It's great to be here. I think it all started in Lee Woods, just outside Bristol, actually. There and various sandy coves in Cornwall and Devon. So I used to go walking with my dad when I was very, very young indeed in Lee Woods. And I think I had this sense of a magical place immediately. In fact, the first job I said I ever wanted to do was be a ranger in those woods.
Yes.
So I've never quite got to do the thing I always wanted to do at the National Trust, but hey, there's still time, hopefully. And then as kids, we'd holiday a camp down in Cornwall with my mum and stepfather. And just off the coast, near a beach called Porthcothan.
Oh, nice.
Not far from Padstow. In fact, going there this weekend. And then with my dad down in South Devon. And I think that really was it. If you were to try to nail that sense of connection to environment, place, nature, it was those places that were deepest inside me from the outset.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I ask that question to a lot of people, and there's often like a generational link to those moments. I bet you can still kind of smell and hear and feel those walks.
Totally. And I think it carries with it a kind of an incredible emotional power as well, because you also associate it with the times in your life when, for whatever reason, you were feeling new things when you were young and you were growing up, but also important moments in family life. And suddenly these things become deeply rooted in you. And you go back to these places and you find new meaning in them, but also they've got that deep time connection as well for you.
So Bristolian through and through.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I was actually born in Amersham, but we moved to Bristol when I was 1.5. Lived here, lived in Bath for a bit, went to university in Leeds, lived out in Wiltshire. But yeah, most of my childhood in Bristol, in Bishopston, in fact.
Yeah. It's like Lee Woods is such a special place, isn't it? Like to be able to have a city which is so thriving, but within such a short time frame and distance, you can be in proper nature. Our studio's down on North Street, and you can run out into Lee Woods and be completely immersed in proper nature so quickly. Isn't it just like such a phenomenal thing?
I think that's one of the really unique things about Bristol, isn't it? Because there are very few cities where you can access nature so quickly and feel so immersed in that nature and away from the city. And of course, just the other side of the gorge, you've got a very busy road, the Portway, you can hear that just about. But actually, you can lose yourself in those woodlands as if you were 100 miles away from a city.
So Environment Agency, Forestry Commission, National Trust. You've got buckets of experience across public and private sectors. And I guess they have very different audiences as well. How has that experience shaped your approach to communications and campaigning when, I guess, connecting people to that wider mission?
It's such a great question because I think it brings you back to audience.
Yeah.
Every time, and your audience feels like the sort of
such a marketing answer to that, isn't it?
We'll start with audience. It's the king and queen of comms and marketing, isn't it? Because if I think of my experiences working at the Environment Agency, which was obviously for a public sector body, as a public servant, thinking it's about the customer, it's about the general public, and then take the example of working through major floods, for example, in 2007, well, 2000 actually, all the way back to when I started there. And then 2015, tens of thousands of properties flooded. The starting point was always the person that could be flooded or is being flooded or has been flooded. What are they going through? What do they need from you? What kind of communications purpose, therefore, does your role need to serve? And so I think that imbued in me a sense of, clarity, what the audience needs, a sense of, quality public information at the right time, delivered in the right way. But then you move on to, say, a charity like the National Trust, where you're wanting to try to galvanise and inspire an audience into supporting you and your charity, but also doing new things. And actually, I think the best starting point there is well, what is it the audience cares about? What is it that's going through their lives? What do they get interested in? What motivates them? And so I think it does always come back to audience. Know your audience. Walk a mile in their shoes if you can. That serves you very well.
It's really interesting that. And before we talk about that, because I'm actually really interested to understand more about that kind of 10-year strategy that you've been part of, kind of shaping, and maybe like the techniques that you use to get into the shoes of very different audiences with very different perspectives. I mean, everything, I guess, is centered around behavior change at some level, your whole career. What are you seeing that's working and maybe not working when it becomes something that's so focused around changing behaviors in a changing world? Especially compared to previous years. What's working, what's not working?
It's such a really important question, isn't it, for people in our profession? Because I think it's on the move.
Right.
We're in an age of polarization, disinformation. We're living through a time when suddenly, would you believe, and it's hard to in a way, that climate denialism is on the rise. Can you believe that? And I think one of the ways not to face into all of that right now is with a sort of po-faced, pointy finger. You must do this, you should do that, or you don't understand, and you should understand. I think it's much more about a combination, really, of humanity, I think honesty and humour, because I think humour probably is the great kind of underplayed element of communications. Take yourself too seriously, try to, I suppose, teach your audience, and I think you're in deep trouble. Come to your audience with a sense of clarity and honesty, yes, and actually face down the misinformation. Yeah. I think that really is important. Be brave about that. Don't be afraid to do that. But I think humanity, this is all about people. People are going to make this a world in which there are solutions and there is hope, and their stories, they are what are going to really inspire change. And I think trying to unlock and activate those, because actually then that unlocks emotion as well. And emotion is one of the most powerful of all currencies, I think, in our profession.
Especially that like level of vulnerability that you can bring to emotion. Totally
absolutely. I mean, just before we started this, we were talking about that. We were talking about the power of some of the work happening around mental health at the moment. And what you would have described as being very traditional men, alpha males, if you like, the power of them opening up about their mental health crises and how the impacts that has had on them and how they've navigated that. I mean, that's incredibly powerful for others, who may be struggling to communicate about those things, talk to anyone about those things. But I think that's right. And I suppose if I think of a recent example from the National Trust, we did pretty big campaign when the Sycamore Gap tree was felled.
Oh, yeah.
It was the single biggest news story the National Trust has ever dealt with. Unbelievable levels of interest around the world. I mean, the phones were ringing off the hook for days and days and days and days. And very early on in that, we decided that we would start with, what does this tree mean to people? Never mind the National Trust. The National Trust has got strong views, yes, but actually, what did this tree mean to people? What were their memories? Why are they feeling emotional about it? And then what do they want to see? What do they want to see happen next? And that unlocked something we call the Trees of Hope campaign, where we managed to take material, recover material from the felled tree and germinate saplings. And then those saplings, we were able to open up a big process of people expressing an interest in having one. And then they all went to charitable causes, and the stories that unlocked. I mean, a woman whose daughter took her own life, who had a history of drug abuse, she wanted one of those saplings to plant it in memory of her daughter in a place that meant a lot to them. And you watch the video of her talking about that. I mean, I just cried and cried. It's unbelievably powerful. Yeah. Locally here, there was a boy who died of cancer, and his parents wanted a tree to plant in his memory. And again, just unbelievably powerful. So yeah, it's coming back to that idea of lock into your audience and emotion.
But let's be honest, when you heard about that story, I think it happened overnight, didn't it? Did you just wake up? Did you hear it on the TV or the radio? Or did you get an email? It must have been that's a proper WTF moment.
Yeah, absolutely that.
What was it like?
It was absolutely that. And in fact, I remember it really, really clearly because I used to work in a role as a Category 1 responder at the Environment Agency, where you're always thinking, when's the next flood?
Right.
Or, when's the next major waste fire or whatever? You're kind of tuned into this stuff in a slightly strange way. And I remember actually seeing a news cutting on my phone from the local newspaper, literally the very first time it broke, and I dropped everything I was doing and just got straight on the phone to the team and said, right, This is going to be the biggest thing we're going to do for a very long time. And it was utterly inexplicable because, and still is really, actually. I mean, the case has just been to court and, the two suspects were convicted. They couldn't even seem to explain really why they did it. I mean, was it just, for attention seeking, for a laugh, to, generate content online? Who knows? I don't think anyone really knows, but it was deeply, deeply tragic. And I think that's interesting as well, because a lot of people said, well, there are people dying all around the world. Why is this so tragic? Why does this story matter so much? And I think, again, you just have to ask people.
Well, surely it's like the metaphor, isn't it? It's the metaphor of humans having an impact on our natural world.
Totally. And of course, you would see this tree all alone in this landscape, looking very fragile and vulnerable. And then gone. And I think you're right. I think it's emblematic of nature's fragility.
But there is so much change happening in communications at the moment, whether it's AI, the political scenario of everything that's going on globally, and just the fact that we're so connected globally. The go woke, go broke backlash that I feel like we're going through. Are you positive about that rate of change? Is it scary for you, or are you finding hope in it?
I think you have to find hope in it. You absolutely have to, because a counsel of despair either to others or yourself will take you, I think, nowhere. And go woke, go broke. It's interesting actually, because we have faced a sort of an institutional and pretty well-organized series of attacks on the National Trust. It started around about 5 years ago when we released a report into the historic connections of the places that we look after in slavery and colonialism, which very factual report, no value judgments in it whatsoever. But you might have thought we had just traduced the entire history of this country. The backlash through the right-wing media, certain right-wing politicians. And it became a kind of real run on us, actually, because it wasn't just that. There was a document, a vision document that was supposedly leaked to the media, which was talking about reimagining the British country house. That became a huge means to frankly, take lumps out of the National Trust. And in all of that, I suppose several thoughts. One is that it's a much beloved institution, and therefore people have strong views about you. And in a way, that's a real compliment. It's a real privilege to work for an organisation that has that. I think there's also a sense of we're a country very uncomfortable still with our sense of identity. And you mentioned, things that are changing fast. I mean, that is. And I think you'll only have to open social media, particularly X right now, to see that actually we're a country that seems to be riven in a sense of what is our identity, who are we, what is our heritage. That is a very live debate at the moment, a very troubling debate in many ways. And it sort of spoke to that partly. But I think it also spoke to that sense of a well-organised, well-funded, bad faith and bad actor campaign that was engineered partly to attract, I think, a sense of dissonance and division in society. And you can take your best guess at what's going on there in terms of motivations. I have my own views, but actually we would keep coming back to, we don't go low, we go high. The great Michelle Obama line, we will not sink to a level of, if you like, slanging match with detractors. We will, however, correct what is wrong. We'll rebut disinformation. We took the every broken window policy approach to that. We didn't let mistruths just lie and stand. We would take them on every time. And eventually we came out of all of that with a lot of new supporters, actually, and a lot of people saying kind of good on you, for kind of standing up for the institution. But it was hard at times.
There was, I guess there is definitely you're no stranger to being put into the spotlight for various interesting initiatives. I remember the story of Scone-gate. Tell us about that. What was that like? Yeah,
woke scones. Well, we have since 2019 had a vegan recipe for our scones. And kind of no one really knew, and it didn't really matter unless you were interested in, veganism and diet and the climate impacts of diet. We didn't hide it. It suddenly became a matter of note when we were approaching one of our annual general meetings. We had a resolution from a member or from outside the organisation to just reduce a little bit the amount of meat that was available through our menus in our cafes. And I think it was 10%, a modicum of change. And you might have thought in then the response from the media that the National Trust was saying the nation must stop eating meat. The nation must, frankly, change its awful ways. So it was immediately hijacked as a story in that way, misframed in that way. But one of the ways that it got to that too was it became obviously clear, I think it was to the Daily Mail originally, that we had a vegan scone recipe. And of course, suddenly the woke scone story was born, and it just ran around. And what was kind of interesting was one of my colleagues at the time did a bit of digging and realized that the Daily Mail themselves had run a vegan recipe for scones in 2019. And so therefore just happened to just slip this out on social media. So it just goes to underline how kind of ridiculous and confected these stories can be.
Yeah, so polarized, aren't they? And I guess so at some level, you've been involved in building National Trust's 10-year strategy. What does that look like? Because I know in your own words, you've said that there's some pretty ambitious goals for 2050. Interested to hear what that process was like to getting to where you're kind of headed now.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, Joss, we did the biggest consultation exercise ever to develop that strategy. So 70,000 people consulted, and that was a range of people, not just members, the general public at large. And people were really clear about what they wanted to see from the trust. They said, we really want you to lean into the most urgent crisis of all, the nature crisis. You're well placed to do that. You can do more at scale. So that became the first big goal, restore nature. So we were committed to restoring 250,000 hectares of nature by 2035. That's the same amount of land that we currently own. So it's a huge amount of land. It's equivalent to 1.5 times the size of Greater London, to give you an idea. Second, make sure there's more access to the stuff that you look after and the stuff that you care about than there currently is, because a lot of people are not accessing those benefits. You have to, in many ways, be lucky enough to either be a member or, well off enough to have a car to drive to places. So National Trust tackle that, end unequal access to nature, beauty, history. And then the third one, use your heft, your voice to drive more change in support of your cause. So inspire millions of people to do more to support that cause. So 3 really big goals, really exciting goals. I mean, particularly if you're a communicator or a campaigner, absolutely brilliant.
And so I guess underpinning that is that kind of reconnection to nature. You've clearly got a personal passion, but a wider drive to have a stance towards our changing climate. Do you think that the British public sees the National Trust as a climate organisation, and should they?
Possibly not first and foremost. We've done quite a bit of research on this, and if you were to ask the question, should we be a climate change campaigning charity, you'll get about 30% of people saying yes. They see that as being much more the preserve of, say, a Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth.
Yeah.
If you ask a slightly differently framed question, given the fact that we're a conservation charity and therefore everything we look after is impacted by climate change. So if you frame the question slightly differently to say, should we do more to look after the places that we care for in response to climate impacts? I mean, almost everyone will say yes.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at our risk register, it's the number one strategic risk on our register, the impacts of climate change, whether it's coastal erosion, houses being hammered by heat and torrential downpours, the work around, we've got properties flooded now in Charlcote, for example, Avebury. These are places that are getting flooded more and more often. So the evidence is there for everyone to see. And I think it really therefore depends about how you frame it.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Literally shifting the narrative means that there's a slightly different perspective and answer to it. And I guess, look, as a heritage organisation, probably the most known heritage organisation that there is in the UK, 130 years of legacy, you've still got to be relevant to younger generations. How are you doing that? Are you personally spending your days on TikTok?
Well, I might have been known to spend a bit of time on it. It's really, really important, actually, isn't it, to try to get that kind of multi-generational view, because, well, for one thing, it's existential for our charity. If young people don't think we're relevant or matter, or don't even know about us, then we're kind of dead. So that will take a while, obviously, to manifest, but it puts a huge onus on us to really connect with that generation. So, I mean, if actually some of the very best work the team's done is on TikTok in the last year or so. It's sort of blend of kind of having fun, being quite off the wall at times, a bit silly, but there's always that thread of a beautiful place, the sort of place anyone could imagine they want to be in. So it's a sort of subtle way to remind people that these places are incredible, but you can have fun with them as well.
What I love about it, because RSPB, WWT, they're also having so much fun communicating that message. I think there's a really interesting metaphor with that. Because that platform is built around creativity and simplicity and single-mindedness, purely because of how that algorithm is almost built, you've got organizations who would typically say things in a slightly different, probably more stuffy way or more technical way, having to go more single-minded and creative. And it's just, I think it's so interesting seeing the creative that's coming out of it, for sure.
Definitely. I mean, I think both those charities are doing fantastic work. You'll see a post from the RSPB that's about how different bird species are likely to behave or walk, and kind of humanizing them, but actually in a very, very fun way. But you take something educationally from it still, but no one's thrusting that down your throat, in your face.
You can, and I love what WWT did recently. I think there was like the Oscars or something. There was some kind of red carpet event, which is, typically what gets front page media at the moment in the kind of OK magazines of the world is what certain celebrities are wearing. They're kind of taking what certain celebrities are wearing, taking the color palettes, and then bring that into different bird species. And I love it. So good. Let's talk about land. Because the trust stewards a huge amount of land. I couldn't grapple how much land, you guys effectively run. How does that land play into the response to nature loss and climate breakdown and accessibility to getting people to reconnect with our kind of natural lands and landscapes?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's quite a few ways you could answer. I think one thing I would definitely highlight is the sort of slightly Cinderella-like status of peatlands, which, I think, the moss that you get in peatlands, sphagnum moss holds 20 times its own weight in water, for example. So if you're looking at trying to reduce flood impacts on communities downstream, investing in those peatlands, locking up that water, slowing the flow. Again, 2% of all carbon in this country is locked up in peatlands. We need to restore them. I think around about only 20% are in good condition. So, if you wanted to make a huge investment in reducing flood risk, locking up carbon, you could just do so much through peatland, and we plan to do that. But we look after 780 miles of coastline, for example. That's often the places that kids will have their, as I did, formative experiences of nature and the outdoors. The 250,000 hectares of land we look after, about 70% of that is farmed land, by and large tenanted farmland. A huge part of the challenge, obviously, is going to be how those farmers can turn their practices towards more nature-friendly practices. The government obviously is a big part of that through incentives, farm payments, but we're a big part of that in terms of, how can that play the fullest part it can. We, through the new strategy, are going to have something called the National Nature Network, because as listeners will know, viewers will know, we have a huge connectivity challenge for nature. As the climate changes and warms, those species that are threatened, they have to have places to go. They will migrate northwards in many cases. They can only do that if we have that connectivity in nature. So a lot of work around green corridors, river corridors, landscape scale solutions. So we're connecting these mosaics of habitat up across the country. So we're in a position to be able to do a lot of that at scale, but it does require a lot of support too, because there's no kind of limitless pot of money for this. So we're going to be doing lots more fundraising in the future. We're going to be doing lots more campaigning, and hopefully the public will come with us.
Yeah, it's a really interesting space that you're in. And you're obviously a very kind of driven person, because outside of your work at National Trust, you also chair Avon Needs Trees. I think we've actually got some tree planting. We've got company-wide tree planting day in autumn. I've already been out and done some volunteering. It was in January. It was very cold, but it was very, very enjoyable. What do you do there? Tell us a little bit more about your involvement at Avon Needs Trees.
Yeah, it's something I have been doing now just over 3 years. I think it's partly because I've been doing lots of roles that have not, I felt, made a difference I could see locally, and I wanted to try and do something about that. So it's actually my wife spotted the job ad and said, is that something you'd be interested in? And so when I started, we had 1.8 members of staff at Avon Needs Trees. We now had 25, so it's grown really quickly as we've taken on new projects, accessed new funds, but also I think had a sort of real sense of urgency about what is the fullest part we can play in tackling the nature and climate crises. So we've got 6 projects, 5 currently live. And the biggest and most recent one, Wick Farm,
this is a big announcement, isn't it?
Yeah. So the biggest new woodland in a generation in the southwest, and part of something called Lower Chew Forest, which is obviously the Lower Chew is a river corridor, and extensive woodland creation. So 100,000 new trees that we'll be planting as part of the charity for that over the next few years. And I mean, it's incredibly exciting because it's on the doorstep of Bristol and Bath. We're getting so much interest from a range of groups. We've had faith groups, Muslim women's groups. We've had people suffering from trauma coming out. We've had schools, refugees and asylum seeker groups. And every single time the feedback has been to be out there doing something, being a part of the solution is what people really love. And so, the charity is really exciting at the moment.
What I love about Avon These Trees is, the barrier to go and volunteer was really, really low. So literally getting my hands, well, actually there were gloves on because it was really cold, dirty, was brilliant. And ultimately, like from a wider perspective, isn't it interesting going in and actually immersing yourself into volunteering? Do you find that it inspires your campaigning, your brain when it comes to National Trust, having something else to...
It really does, actually. In fact, it does all sorts of things. I mean, the other thing, it just is so good for your mental health. I mean, sometimes when you're exposed to an awful lot of tough stuff around whatever it might be, culture wars or, the climate crisis, I've found it is the single most effective thing for really tackling my mental health challenges and making me feel like actually... somehow I'm facing into that stuff with a little worthwhile contribution. It's a tiny thing, but actually it feels very, very good. But particularly doing it amongst other people as well. All these other volunteers, as you say.
What is that? Is it belonging, purpose?
Yeah, I think it is just feeling like you're a little part of a bigger solution that's happening, and knowing also that this is going to be a legacy left behind. So these trees will be the ones that hopefully my great grandchildren will visit when they're big mature oaks, in 100 years' time or whatever. So it's passing something on too. And it's funny, as you say, I mean, anyone can do it. So we have sort of university students with their white trainers coming out, and they've never done anything like this before, and they absolutely love it. Okay, they trash their trainers in the process. Sorry, guys, but it is very inclusive as an activity. And what I found in doing it is it attracts an incredibly diverse range of people, and we have people in their 80s coming out to do this. It's unbelievably inspiring. Very exciting to be a part of that.
And one of the other things that I guess connects you to community is to feel like, your individual actions aren't going anywhere is activism. And a couple of weeks ago, you were outside Westminster standing shoulder to shoulder with fellow campaigners, calling for MPs to give the climate and nature crisis the precedence it needs. After you were out at Westminster, you put out a LinkedIn post asking a very poignant question: what will it take for climate change to become a top 3 issue again for the public? And ultimately for nature to be seen as a major part of the solution. Great question. Uno reverse. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think there's probably a gloomy way of looking at this, which is that we need to see more of the climate impacts, really wreaking havoc more on the nation for people to really wake up to it. So more 40 degrees centigrade plus days, those sort of savage heat spikes that we've had a few of now. The tens of thousands of properties flooded. We haven't had a really big multi-regional flood event for a while, but I don't think that really is it, because I also think that there's a positive answer here, which is that we need politicians, certainly governments of every kind, to demonstrate themselves that this isn't just Ed Miliband's issue, for example, in his department. This is every department's issue, because it has impacts across all those departments. It needs to be a cross-bench set of solutions. The parliamentary system's at its best with these big, complex issues when, frankly, parliamentarians come together and forget those political divides. I think that would really set a template for the nation, because there are so many people doing so many great things, but it feels like it's almost despite that broader set of supportive elements. Obviously, money plays a big part in this, but actually, if suddenly we normalize positive activism, solutions activism, and the government help with that, I would say one final thing is that the sector itself does a lot of great things, but a little bit too kind of separately to one another. I think if it could come together and drive something much more as one sector with one big long-term campaign, I think that could be really powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I find it really interesting that you've often got like the nature space, the climate space, the ocean space. They kind of operate in their own little realms sometimes. I've got a fun one for you. If nature had a press office and you were head of comms, what would nature's top priority be right now? And what would the mother's tone of voice be?
That is a very, very good question. I think nature's top priority would be immersing people, because, I mean, let's face it, we need more green and less screen right now, hey? I mean, there is
re-immersion, really, though.
What it is, but to younger generations, it's probably the most under-immersed generation we've ever known when it comes to nature and green space. So
evolutionary, we are
throughout the whole span of human history, right. and so I think that is the top priority, because of course, as soon as you get kids out into nature, well, not only do they absolutely love it, but they create those bonds really early. It's like Attenborough says, you can't care about something you haven't experienced. So I think that's probably priority number one. But the tone of voice thing is tricky. I mean.
Have you seen the Apple ad that they did? They had Mother Nature on the boardroom. There was definitely some good things and some not so good things about it. But I quite liked how they had various celebrities in there, and Mother Nature was quite angry, but then she also was quite humoristic at the same time. But would you say that she's pretty angry right now?
Yeah, if you look at Lovelock and the Gaia theory stuff, I reckon she is hurting. Yeah, and she's very forgiving, and she has a huge, huge heart. I mean, we only have to see how nature rebounds so quickly in places where human beings have abandoned those places for whatever reason. I'm reading an amazing book at the moment called Isles of Abandonment that's precisely about that, and I recommend it to anyone. I think there would be a warm, loving tone, but quite a hurt tone to that tone of voice right now.
And you mentioned, especially younger generations, whether it's immersing them or, evolutionary re-immersing them. If you were briefed to rebrand nature to Gen Z and below, how would you do that? What would the kind of approach be? How would the tagline go?
Yeah, I think, given the acuteness of the mental health crisis that young people are facing right now, I think it'd be something really simple like "be well here," be well in nature, because we all know that people are so much more well in nature. There's so much evidence and research to back that up. And actually not just being in nature, doing something in nature, that there's very good evidence from people like Miles Richardson on that as well. Connecting with nature genuinely by doing something in nature. So for kids, that could be building a den.
Yeah.
It could be for teenagers planting a tree. It could be just getting out and doing something fun.
Using your imagination.
Yeah.
Play.
And that's a crisis that is breaking like a huge wave on this and other nations at the moment. I think it's a huge part of the answer.
Yeah, I find it really, really interesting, that, isn't it? So there's, I'm fascinated by certain insight, and I know that things like Christianity is on the up at the moment, specifically with young people. And I think you kind of ask those questions, why? Is it that their whole lives are effectively online? They've always been immersed at some level with algorithm. Are they seeking a higher purpose? You see certain statistics like younger people drinking less alcohol and wanting health and wellness. I go to the gym on a on a Saturday morning sometimes, and I look around and there's loads of young people, and I'm like, hang on a second, you should be hungover in bed right now. But they're not. And I used to work for a drinks brand who had a whole strategy around partying, and now it's around the gym. So I think bang on there, like that higher purpose, that health connection. You just look at things like ultra processed foods, and you do have a movement from people going to more of a whole foods approach, based off cost, but based off health. And there's something in that, isn't there?
There is. It's also interesting that talking to 23-year-old son, 21-year-old daughter, they both say that people of their age are actually very aware of what the social media algorithms are doing to them. They are aware of how constructed and fashion they are to ensnare and create addiction. So that given that level of awareness, I think they're looking for counter solutions. They're looking for antidotes. They're looking for other things. And that can take many different forms. But that's probably one of the most exciting things happening at the moment, starting to shrug off the thrall of social media. Is so needed.
So I'm interested to know about campaigns that you've either been inspired by or that you've been a part of. Are there any specific moments that you've been especially proud and that you feel have really done the job of shifting the narrative or kind of moved the dial on awareness and action?
Well, I'll maybe mention one that is not one I was involved with, first of all, which I briefly mentioned to you before, Joss, which is the work on Ocean and David Attenborough, because that film that came out a couple of months ago, produced by Silverback, you watch it, it's the most devastating watch. And Attenborough is his absolute best. And yet it still has hope. And what it's done is it's created awareness of what's going on underneath the waves, bottom trawling particularly, does so graphically. And with such a sense of what the impacts are, that it's already created a big shift in sentiment such that the UN conference on oceans a little bit earlier in the year, now looking at a massive extension of bans on zones of bottom trawling. But I think it's one of those single pieces of content that has so much thought gone into it, as well as years of planning with a sense of this moment to achieve this end, this outcome, to this benefit. It's unbelievably brilliant work.
I absolutely, it's a great, because people think of it as just a documentary, but it's a campaign.
Yes, it's absolutely.
The whole strategic release of that, when it was released, the kind of how do we create storytelling that was quite literally shown in the Houses of Parliament. A incredibly poignant time for one of, if not the best figure that's, in terms of humanity, that's probably ever existed in modern times, at least. It is a campaign. You know what, just because I'm going to ask you the wider question in a second, but the thing that really got me in Oceans, which, if anybody on who's listening to this podcast hasn't watched it, you have to watch it. There's a really visual, kind of out of sight, out of mind awareness driver that having the camera literally showing bottom trawling was super, super visual and ultimately is the narrative arc to the whole film. But to me, the moment that, I went to the screening of it and I was just in tears. I was fully in tears, and I've still got goosebumps thinking about this right now. It was actually the shot in the Arctic where these factories are operating, and you've got the most precious wildlife and animals and just beautiful creatures. And then it pans to this ship that's effectively creating animal food. And under the guise, in lots of cases, of it being sustainable as well, through certain certifications. I mean, that to me was the most harrowing moment, and the thing that really hit me the most.
Yeah, and the impacts on indigenous peoples, you know, enormous trawlers, just panning across the screen, and then suddenly there's a tiny vessel, a rowing boat, with someone who's fished that and their generations of ancestors have fished those places for so many hundreds of years. And you can see that they don't stand a chance, and it's absolutely devastating.
But that's like happening on our planet right now. And without communications, without modern content, without storytelling, a lot of people say, oh, well, like natural history documentaries, you've kind of been there, done that. But they're just so important. Look at the shift. Look at the momentum that the ocean space is having right now. Completely. Ultimately, I would say a huge amount of that. There's some brilliant organizations doing brilliant things, but that one moment, it's just opened it up, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, credit to the likes of Silverback, who do such incredibly good work, but also to David Attenborough himself. I mean, he just does not stop. And actually, every time he does something new, he's even more searing and almost, unequivocal in his analysis, and it's so compelling. And of course, everyone listens to him, and he's kind of wringing out every year of his life on that mission. It's incredible.
So a campaign that you've been involved in?
Probably recently, I would say Save Our Wild Isles, which again, we did it as a partnership campaign with RSPB and WWF. Off the back of the TV series Wild Isles. Again, Silverback produced it. With the two charities as co-producers. And I think one of the things that was the best legacies of all with that is that it came out right at the time that the current government, the new Labour government, was really gearing up for the general election. So we managed to get to them at the party conferences with all of that campaigning content, with all of that kind of momentum. And it absolutely then became a part of their manifesto. They're part of their narrative. Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for Defence, still uses that language. If we're one of the most nature-depleted countries on earth, it got to them at the right time in the right way. And actually, when you look at their budget decisions, for example, their commitments to nature recovery, it has had a kind of an integral effect on their policy platform. So I think that probably, and the other one, which was legacy outcome, which was amazing, was that we had a wonderful kind of focus of the impacts on puffins on the Farne Islands and in the northeast of the country. From sand eel fisheries. And out of all of that campaign came a ban on sand eel fishing in that part of the world. So immediately you can see how those completely adorable puffins and pufflings, their little babies, are suddenly going to prosper because of those bans on sand eel fishing.
What I loved about that, not just liked, I loved about that campaign, because I used that as a case study the whole time, is that you also brought it into the business case. So the study in there that the amount of employees who want their employers to have a more credible nature strategy, like it's there, and it's so underutilized by businesses.
Completely. And one of my regrets is that we couldn't keep going with that campaign, because like we were saying earlier, I mean, ideally you really want to be looking at 5-10 years for these sorts of campaigns. And I mean, we all wanted to, but it's just been such a financially straitened time over the last sort of year or so. Inflationary pressures. All charities are facing different versions of tough right now in that way. Otherwise, we'd absolutely have kept going with it. So it's kind of sad, but we learned a huge amount from it. And the three charities that we're the best of friends now. It wasn't the easiest thing to do, but oh my goodness me, we forged incredible friendships through that process.
So look, I asked the same three questions on all podcasts that I've done, and I think you're going to have quite good answers to this. So I'm interested to hear what you're going to say. Favorite book or podcast in or outside of business or charity? Right.
I've just, about a month or so ago, finished reading Robert McFarlane's new book, Is a River Alive? And it is about the rights, the inherent rights of rivers around the world. It's just so beautifully written. I mean, he is a campaigner par excellence. But he tells such human stories that the characters just jump off the page. But he writes in poetry. He's unbelievable. Recommend it to anyone. Podcast, I'm a bit of a politico. My favorite political podcast is Electoral Dysfunction, which it's a breath of fresh air because it's hosted by 3 women. Beth Rigby is the anchor. So you've got Ruth Davidson and you've got Harriet Harman. They're just brilliant. They're just so not blokey and so not what you get on most of the other political podcasts. Absolutely love it.
You got a big day in the office. What artist or album are you putting on to get you pumped?
Get me pumped. Well, I think it's probably I would go one of 2 directions first thing of the day. I'd either go classical music to clear my head, and just set myself right mentally. Or if I'm like thinking a bit more funky and soulful, Fat Freddy's Drop, who I could play Fat Freddy's Drop actually any time of the day. This time of the year, there's something about the power of roots reggae. So in the evenings, it would be late 60s Wailers, before Bob Marley and the Wailers became Island Records. If you listen to all their original stuff, oh my goodness, it's just the best. And of course, it was all then redone in the 70s. But the early version's just unbelievable.
See, there's a link in those 2 answers that you've given me to those 2 questions because New Zealand are really taking kind of naming nature and rivers really seriously at the moment, having a huge amount of traction. And I believe that the founder of Fat Freddy's Drop just passed away, unfortunately, didn't he? And he's from New Zealand.
Do you know what? I did not know that, and I'm suddenly absolutely devastated. I mean, I've seen them live a couple of times. Well, that's very big news. I mean, so if your listeners are interested in just checking out one song, I recommend The Raft, because actually it's a great environmental song as well as an incredibly good song in its own right.
So if you could collaborate with one person of influence in a campaign, who would it be and why?
So again, it's going to be Robert McFarlane.
Okay.
I am absolutely in awe of him. And having met him and worked with him a bit earlier this year at Hay Festival, I can see how he is such a force for positive change in some very, very cerebral and highly kind of strategic ways, as well as he brings music into his work, he brings art into his work, as well as his incredible writing facility. Love it.
I mean, that's 3 great answers. Mark, thank you. So interesting. Absolutely love that conversation. And having been a member for a long time and a long-term fan, it's so interesting hearing kind of things, from the inside. And keep doing brilliant work at Avon Needs Trees as well. And good luck pushing the new 10-year strategy. Thanks
so much, Joss. Thank you very much.